For the longest time, I've been a Voidlock main in PvP, and I've often hyped up the utility of things like Nova Bomb and Devour. But between the strength of Titan Barricades and Abyss Hunters and the overall pace of the game being slowed down as a result, I was feeling like my Warlock just wasn't getting it done. This led me to start revisiting different Warlock subclasses to see if maybe my love for Void was holding me back. Of course, you have subclasses like Solar where you get things like Icarus Dash and healing needs, but I've personally just never been a fan of that subclass, and I wanted something that had a good balance of lethality but also allowed me to play faster. This led me back to statistically one of the most slept on subclasses for Warlock, Arc. So for the past couple weeks, I've been primarily maining Arc Warlock, and I've learned some best practices and cool tricks to make this subclass a contender. So in today's video, I'll show you how to master Arc on Warlock by showing the fragments and aspects you should be utilizing, best practices for your super, stats to focus on, and how you can use Arc to pick up the pace in PvP. Diving into our subclass, and for our super we'll be using Chaos Reach, but I will be coming back to that, so first I'll fly through the abilities, then dive into our aspects and fragments. As you can see, for our abilities we're using Healing Rift. Unless you are running some specific build that requires Empowering Rift, I will continue to utilize Healing Rift to give us that boost in survivability. Next we'll be running Burst Glide because it's the least floaty, Chain Lightning over Ball Lightning for the lower melee cooldown, and Pulse Grenade for all those Titan Barricades. A quick note here is to not sleep on Flashbang Grenades. They are also very good for blinding your enemy and just creating confusion overall for the enemy team. So we got all that out the way, let's talk aspects. For our first aspect, it's going to be Lightning Surge, and this is the aspect that makes this subclass so lethal. Lightning Surge allows you to do a short distance teleport, then do like a sliding lightning strike type move that you can almost guarantee will get you at least 1 kill, and in a group will often get you 2 kills. This aspect is great for playing fast and getting an easy first pick in the competitive playlist and trials, due to the fact that you basically have to hit your enemy at least once from any bullet from any gun to secure a kill using this ability. It's hard to express just how generous the hitbox is on this ability until you've used it. Because of that, it allows us to play way more aggressive, especially when you have enemies playing corners, one shot behind a wall, or playing in large groups. It's especially good for teams playing together because of the fact that it jolts your enemy and will often change the damage of the ability to multiple players, resulting in multiple kills. Another benefit of this ability is you can also use it to get away or reposition, since you can use the blink animation to jump between cover or make yourself just a little harder to hit when trying to escape. Now this ability also has an interesting interaction with our super to make it more potent, but more on that later. Our next aspect is pretty straightforward, and it's Arc Soul. This allows us to have our Arc Buddy spawn with us anytime we pop a rift, and helps add some nice additional chip damage in our fights, and can occasionally finish off an enemy when they are one shot. It's not the craziest of aspects, but you'll often find your enemy panicking when fighting you with your Arc Buddy, since it's additional damage they will have to account for when engaging you. Jumping into our fragments, and a theme you're going to see here is every fragment I choose, or as many as I can choose, are going to mainly help with increasing our overall stats, and so that's the main theme you're going to see throughout our fragments. But let's just kind of jump in. So Spark of Brilliance, defeating a blinded target with precision damage creates a blinding explosion. This actually would be overall not bad if you ran Flashbang Grenade, but again, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be running Pulse Grenade, and so I'm mainly running this for the plus 10 intellect, and because I didn't really find anything else that I thought was better enough to justify not having the plus 10 intellect. Next we have Spark of Feedback, taking melee damage briefly increases your outgoing melee damage. I actually find this to be really helpful, especially when you're countering an enemy and maybe you don't use Lightning Surge, but you use Chain Lightning. It's going to do a ton of damage because of Spark of Feedback. And we get the plus 10 resilience, by the way, which is also nice. Spark of Resistance is our next fragment. While surrounded by combatants, you are more resistant to incoming damage. Again, you see the kind of consistency, plus 10 strength, which is great, but also having that little bit more resistance is nice. Again, especially when we're flying with Lightning Surge into a group of enemies, this will hopefully give us enough additional resistance to hopefully survive that fight, or just when we're surrounded by enemies in general. Anytime you can have additional resistance, that's going to be beneficial in PvP. Next we have Spark of Recharge. While critically wounded, your melee and grenade energy regenerate more quickly. This is nice just because when we get really hurt as we're getting in and out of gunfights, we are going to be getting that additional melee and grenade energy, which is awesome because we're allowing us to throw our Pulse Grenade more, and anything we can do to get Lightning Surge more often is going to be super helpful. So this is a great way to just get kind of free ability regen just literally for playing the game, because as you play PvP, you're naturally going to get critically wounded, which means you're naturally going to get that additional regen. Now, as promised, let's talk about our super. Our super of choice is going to be Chaos Reach. Now this super is not nearly as powerful as it used to be, which is a good thing, but it recently had its base cooldown reduced to 7 minutes and 35 seconds, making it one of the faster generating supers in Destiny 2, But even with that, I would be lying if I didn't tell you this is probably the weakest part of the subclass. This is due to the fact that you need to be much more accurate with it now, and your damage resist in super is still very low, meaning you can be somewhat easily killed out of it. So we really have two ways I would recommend using Chaos Reach. The first is saving it as a panic super or shutdown supers for wells or severely weaken a bubble, because yes, it cannot destroy a bubble, or we find a way to make us harder to kill as we go to pop our super. This, ladies and gentlemen, is where you can combine Lightning Surge and Chaos Reach. As you just saw, we can use the teleporting effect of Lightning Surge, then pop our super as we come out of the animation. This allows you to fly into an engagement while taking little damage and popping your super at the end and creating a nice element of surprise as you come out of your animation. I've used this technique many times in the Crucible, and as long as you time it right, it is one of the coolest and most successful ways to get the drop on your enemies with Chaos Reach. In my opinion, this technique makes Chaos Reach harder to anticipate and improves the overall viability of the super. I encourage you all to give the technique a try and let me know what you think in the comments below. Next thing we gotta talk about is stats, because stats are really what bring this whole subclass together. And so I'm gonna talk about a couple of things you're really gonna wanna focus on and some things you're maybe not gonna wanna focus on quite as much. Starting with recovery per always. Recovery is gonna allow us to boost our survivability and also directly ties into having that lower class cooldown, so it allows us to get our rift more frequently. I've talked about this in a million of my warlock videos, so I don't feel like the need to go too deep into this, but again, you want to try to get as close to tier 10 or 100 recovery as possible. I always recommend starting here as you go through working through your stats. Next is gonna be, you guessed it, our strength stat, which impacts Lightning Surge and our melee. I've landed at tier 8 here. You could probably land as low as tier 6 if you really could only manage that, but I would try to really focus on your strength. The next thing I'd really focus on after that, or maybe in tandem with that, is going to be discipline, just to allow you to get that pulse grenade more often to help with all the Titan barricades that are still out there in the Crucible. From there, I would also then go to resilience. This is going to allow us to barely survive some of those shotgun battles and just make us a little bit harder to kill, survive, you know, for the 1 or 2 people in all of the Crucible that use Thorn, things like that. And the last thing, or one of the lowest things outside of mobility, because we literally don't care about mobility at all, is intellect. And that's because, like I talked about, Chaos Reach is kind of the weakest part of this subclass. So then we don't want to necessarily invest too much in our intellect stat. Also, because it's one of the lower cooldowns, you can see at tier 7 here, I'm already at 6 minutes and 14 seconds, which is already plenty low. And going down to tier 8 isn't going to be that much more worth it. And so I just kind of land around tier 6, tier 7, I think is pretty good for the intellect stat. Now, getting into our overall armor, because I do want to talk about this. As you can see, there's something kind of off here, and I'm not running Apathettic aspect. And I've talked for a long time about how I think this is the best warlock exotic, and basically it's all I run. And I still think overall Apathettic aspect is definitely the best warlock exotic for a majority of people. But for me, trying to play faster and kind of pairing with this subclass, I decided to throw on transversive steps again, which I haven't literally used for years, like actually years. And I don't think I'm gonna be able to take them off again. And it's because it allows me to just move around the map so much faster. You're able to constantly get in and out of engagements and reposition so quickly, fly in so quickly, fly out so quickly. Pairing that with Lightning Surge and how transversive steps allow you to close that gap even faster. And I've really been enjoying transversive steps a lot. I do encourage anyone who hasn't tried them in a really long time, maybe ever since all the handling nerfs and things like that, and quick draw nerfs, to try it again, especially since they removed or reverted the slide nerf that hurt your stability and increased incoming flinch. Sliding in with transversive steps now almost feels like he's got like almost like a shadow buff because they reverted so many of these changes. You can just fly in, jump in, your shots are going to still land, all those kind of cool things we were used to before, and all have since been reverted. So I do encourage anyone playing warlock to revisit transversive steps, because I think I'm going to be making these for a really long time. Now, a huge part of that is because of the weapons I'm using. As you can see here, I'm using Rose, which has a high handling of 70. On my Rose, I got small bore, tactical mag, slide shot, and rangefinder with a range masterwork. So not bad, definitely not like a quote unquote god roll. but definitely more than enough to get the job done. Obviously with Slide Shot, you're gonna get that boost to range stability, and Rangefinder I feel like is a must, but this has been really nice because of that increased handling, and this allows you to move even faster when this weapon is equipped, which also pairs really well with Transversus Steps because you're gonna be having this thing out and just flying around the map. And then I pair that with Soldier's Tail, which is nice because again, this is another higher handling weapon. And the reason I keep mentioning handling when talking about my Rose and Soldier's Tail is because the handling on these weapons is high enough to where I don't feel the need to run something like Apathettic Aspect. And even if I was running something lower handling, I would probably just deal with it just because I'm enjoying Transversus Steps so much. But you can kind of see the rule here on my Soldier's Tail. Definitely an old favorite of mine. Haven't really used it in a long time, but I've been using it more the past couple of days and definitely enjoying it. Also have my crafted heritage, but because I love Rose so much right now, it's kind of taking a back seat. Heavy, doesn't really matter. I use Parasite for the memes and just kind of enjoy getting random one-off kills with it. Something else I'll mention is just running some kind of dexterity mod, either hand cannon or shotgun, depending on what you feel is best. Just to give, when you're swapping between these weapons and switching between in gunfights, makes it feel a little bit smoother. But again, overall, really just wanted to highlight Transversus Steps here, and obviously depends on the weapons you're using. But if you can manage, especially with things like Rose or Exalted Truth, which all are really good hand cannons with high handling or relatively high handling, and then a higher handling option, like Sojourner's Tale, Matador 64 obviously has great handling. There's a lot of good options to where you don't really need Apathettic Aspect for Warlock, in my opinion, as much as previously. So again, definitely recommend Transversus Steps. Really plays into allowing us to play super fast when I'm playing on Arc Warlock. As you can see, with the power of Lightning Surge combined with an exotic like Transversus Steps, and the ability to combine all of these things to take Chaos Reach to another level, Arc allows you to speed up the pace of the game and apply a lot of pressure to your enemies in the Crucible. If you enjoyed this video, consider checking out either one of the videos on the screen now.